Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Chamber's webinar with IDF spokesperson, Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who will speak about the war with Hamas in Gaza, situation with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a regional briefing. But before that, on our last webinar with the Hujja Ari, we spoke about how excited we were to be hosting 5 delegations in the first half of this year. I'm delighted to now say that this number is 7. That's right, we're expecting to host 7 delegations in the first half of 2024. And I just want to share something here. As you all know, a big part of our delegations is the innovation and culture of innovation that thrives in Israel and is a beacon to the world. In late December, Intel, one of around 500 multinationals with an R&D and manufacturing presence here, announced that it's going to be investing another $25 billion in Israel. Intel operates 4 development and production sites here, including its manufacturing plant in Kiryat Gat called Fab 28 that produces Intel 7 technology and advanced nanometer chips and employs nearly 12,000 people in Israel while indirectly employing another 42,000 more. At some $9 billion, Intel's exports account for around 5.5% of total high-tech exports. The Centrino chip, which enables the use of Wi-Fi, and its core processors were developed in Israel. And after Intel's purchase of Mobileye, Jerusalem is Intel's global center for autonomous driving technologies. We all know too well the horrors of October 7, but what's not known enough of are the superhuman stories of heroism. One small but significant example is about someone none of you would have heard of, Shmulik, our gardener. On October 7 at 6:45 a.m., his son Ophir rang him from the Nova rave party to say dozens of terrorists have attacked the party, shooting, raping, and kidnapping. Shmulik didn't hesitate. He jumped into his car, drove past army roadblocks, and went straight into what only can be described as a bloody massacre. But Shmulik miraculously dodged bullets, saved his son and other friends, and literally threw them in the back of his ute that you can see in this photo. But then Shmulik didn't stop there. He went back in 3 times, and all up over the next 11 hours, he literally saved the lives of close to 40 people. We are now into day 103 of hostages being cruelly held in awful conditions in Gaza. A lot of people in this webinar are very disappointed Australia's foreign minister, who is now visiting Israel, will not be going down south to witness firsthand the atrocities of October 7. We do hope her visit here will encourage Australia to do more to help release the hostages by putting pressure on Red Cross, Qatar, and others. It's now my pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, from the Office of the IDF spokesperson, who many of you would have seen on TV and different websites, doing amazing work, talking about the great work of the IDF now down south and up north. So I'm now going to hand over to Peter. Please prepare your questions. We'll have ample time at the end. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you on what is now day 103, or 102, I think it is this morning, here in Israel. And for me, it's 100 days of reserve duty service that I never thought I would have to repeat. And I want to take this opportunity within the next 30 minutes to try and give you a brief overview of how we got here, where we are, and perhaps where we're going. Of course, I won't have answers for all of the questions because we're in the midst of war, but there is a distinct challenge that we are facing. On the 7th of October, I was in the early hours of the morning. I was lying in bed, jet-lagged, I got back from a family vacation in Florida. Like most normal people, what do we do when we're jet lagged lying in bed? Scroll on my social media. The mobile phone started at 6:30 to sound and the alarm, and it woke my wife up. She wasn't jet lagged. She looked at me. She said, "What's going on?" I said, "There are sirens down south." And as I said, down south, the sirens in my Tel Aviv suburb of Ramat Gan, where I live, also began to sound. So we woke up, we got my daughter out of her bed, we went down to the shelter. And as we came up from the shelter some 10 minutes later, on social media, it was very clear what we were experiencing here in Israel was something very different and very devastating to Israeli society and Israeli defense as a whole. For me, when I saw the paragliders coming over the fence at the Nova party, the music festival, I immediately understand that it was something we'd never ever experienced before. My wife looked at me, she said, "Peter, they're coming for us too." And I think if that is probably where most Israelis feel today, the constant state of insecurity, the threat that is looming from every direction, a threat that, given the opportunities, our enemies will try and take advantage. And that is why on that day, the government instructed the IDF to engage Hamas with three core goals in mind. First of all, to dismantle and destroy Hamas as a governing entity of the Gaza Strip, to bring back the hostages. At that time, it was some 240, and restore safety and security to the people of Israel. What happened in the immediate hours of that morning of the 7th of October was unprecedented in Israel's history of terrorism, and we've had ample terrorism over the course of our history. We saw something like 3,000 terrorists storm into the border area. They were able to reach something around, in different areas, around 20 kilometers. They overran military bases, penetrated into civilian communities, and of course, took a serious toll off of a music festival taking place in the desert, a festival of love. I'm briefing under the assumption that you have the main figures, but I will just go over them briefly. That immediate attack resulted in some 1,200 Israelis butchered, murdered, massacred in the most inhumane ways. 240, as I said, 240 people abducted into Gaza. Their invasion into Israel was so extensive and widespread that it took us something like 13 days to retake complete control over the border area. So we were going for several days, house to house, door to door, community to community, to try and seek out and reveal where the terrorists were actually hiding. From our perspective, that obviously indicates the magnitude of their attack. If I want to go over the initial stages of the war, of course, it was regaining control of the border area. As I said, as far as 20 kilometers away of the border, terrorists had reached. But towns like Ofakim, Sderot, Kibbutzim across the border perimeter, obviously all penetrated, and the military bases which were overrun created a state of, from a military perspective, of lack of knowledge, lack of immediate control. And what we needed to do was regain control of the immediate vicinity of the border area. We evacuated all of the civilians that remained in the area so that the military could operate, and engaged on wide-scale airstrikes against Hamas in order to deter, seek out, and kill the leaders. The initial stages of the ground operation began at the around the end of October, which included maintaining and expanding control over the border area specifically in order to find bodies, because Hamas indeed abducted people, but they also, in their flee from Israel, from the communities, they dropped bodies in the border area. So we were gathering intelligence from the border area, but also picking up bodies in that border area. And as the operation expanded, our ground operations began on the 27th of October in, I would say, mostly in northern Gaza Strip, in the northern Gaza Strip. We did it very conscientiously in a way that tried to limit civilian casualties. Hamas, the people of Gaza from the outset are not the enemy of Israel, but Hamas is the enemy. And therefore, we created and developed over the course of the several years a vast plan of mass evacuation of the civilian areas in the northern Gaza Strip. Those actions included evacuation, calls for evacuation based on communications, mass communication, dropping leaflets, making phone calls, recorded messages, text messages, millions and millions of announcements to get people to evacuate from the north, because the north of Gaza Strip was Hamas's hub of control, their main position and locations of government. And that is why we intended on mobilizing there at the beginning in order to fulfill our mission of dismantling and destroying Hamas as a governing authority. The ground operation was focused very much, as I said, in the northern areas, up until it created an opportunity in the last week of November for an operational pause. The operational pause was instructed by the government. What was a result of the military pressure. It created the opportunity to bring home hostages, and indeed 110 hostages were released in that operational pause that lasted 7 days. 86 of those hostages, mostly women and children, were Israelis. The remaining 24 were mostly foreign workers, whether it's mostly Thai workers, but also some Filipinos. And this was only a result of our military pressure on Hamas. They're feeling pursued, and therefore they're feeling that they needed a breath of fresh air. Probably they wanted to regroup. From our perspective, the military abided by the operational pause in order to help us achieve what would appear to be the other main goal of this war, in order to bring home hostages. We are currently, that broke down the operational pause. Israel was prepared for that to continue as long as Hamas would continue to release hostages. On the early hours of the 1st of December here in Israel, at 7 o'clock in the morning here, the operational pause was supposed to end unless Hamas decided to release more hostages. Unfortunately, at 6 a.m. that morning, they decided to open a barrage of rocket fire against Israel. And so we understood that they would not be releasing any more hostages. So we mobilized and re-engaged. And I would say we continued our efforts in the north of the Gaza Strip, but also increased and operated in the south, in the areas of Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis is important because it is a central, the second largest town area in the Gaza Strip, but also the birthplace and the hometown of Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar is Hamas's prime minister, the mastermind of the massacre of the 7th of October, and the person who financed, trained, equipped, and gave the instruction to attack us strategically on the 7th of October. What we're seeing in the course of our battle, I want to go through and characterize some of the challenges that we faced, but also some of the characterization of our ground operations. So first of all, what we're finding is a 360 degrees threat. First, which would realize the extent of the tunnel network that Hamas has been building over the last 16 years of their governance. It is a very, very vast, I would say most expensive and expansive construction project ever to exist in Gaza. It is a whole network of what we would say a city, a mini city, or a collective of mini cities that are all interconnected. From there, Hamas had planned and executed and conducted fights, battles, wars in the past, but they'd specifically designed this tunnel system in order to conduct extended battle, to conceal their activities, to utilize it for tactical strikes, but also attacks that continue to take place even this morning from rockets that are fired from beneath ground and underground silos or concealed positions where they can just load the rockets beneath ground and fire them from their tunnel system. So that's just one component of the challenges that we face. Of course, what we saw on the 7th of October and we've seen throughout this war is anti-tank guided missiles, RPGs, explosive drones, sniper fire. So these are the types of combat that we are facing on the battleground itself. Of course, an additional challenge would be the booby traps that we are finding in almost all of the buildings that they've utilized, civilian buildings that they've utilized, IEDs, explosive devices, booby traps, in order to try and limit and contain our mobilization. And of course, any professional military mobilizing and inside a partially destroyed urban environment poses a challenge. In order to address those challenges, we've conducted the basic operational principles that have allowed us to limit casualties via careful, accurate, and straightforward planning. So while we are now over 3 months into this war, and every death of our soldiers or injury is a tragedy, I can say that our slow and secure maneuvering with extensive defensive efforts have proven very effective. All of our mobilization is covered by both extensive engineering work, so you can't expose a tunnel network without combat engineers, and of course, aerial support. So we have both the strike helicopters and strike aircraft from different types that are all empowering us and enabling us to mobilize. I think it's important to weigh on the enemy that we are fighting. What we have seen and we've revealed extensively to the public, and I've spoken about it several times on Australian television. The way Hamas has built their concept of operation, they built it around specific hubs. Those specific hubs, the centers of those hubs, were mostly hospitals that they understood would be challenging for the IDF to operate against, because we do not target hospitals that they could utilize in order to access the tunnel system, hospitals that they could conduct their abduction of hostages into those hospital areas, and hospitals that could be utilized for command and control, communicating to the different terrorist squads that are out in the field. And that is what we are finding. We found that and revealed extensive evidence to the world, which is sometimes criticized. I think it's criticized from the basic fundamentals of why would a professional military mobilize against a hospital. But when Hamas strategically turned hospitals into strongholds, they basically exposed the hospitals to the threat. So what we did is we've been, throughout the course of this war, engaging in and around hospital areas only after we exhaust all of our efforts to evacuate patients, to evacuate people taking refuge in hospital premises, sometimes putting ourselves at risk, and of course giving Hamas the heads up and the opportunity to evacuate and potentially escape from the battleground, creating an operational advantage to the enemy. Nevertheless, we did conduct several operations, both in the main hospital of Al-Shifa Hospital, but also in the Rantisi, the Qatari Hospital, the Al-Aqsa Hospital, all of these locations. And I can say we found components of Hamas's method of exploitation as part of their operational plan. It didn't happen just by mistake. And I think this is really important to understand. And I think my personal biggest disappointment from what I've seen throughout this war of 3 months now is the lack of any international condemnation. The World Health Organization hasn't even raised alarm, concern, and as I said, even condemnation of Hamas's strategic goal at putting hospitals at risk. By operating there, they have put, obviously, the people at risk, but they've also called in a necessity for Israel to act against those strongholds. This, for me, is one of the biggest challenges that we face in communicating to the world. And I think that this is important to stress. While I remain on the issue of the medical mission, I think it's important to expand also on the issue of the humanitarian efforts, because this is an issue of concern around the world, that when Israel and the IDF is mobilizing against Hamas in Gaza, a place of some 2.2 million people, how do you operate against a terrorist organization that has deeply embedded itself within the civilian arena? So, of course, first of all, how do we evacuate and get people out of harm's way with regard to hospitals specifically, because of those specific hubs? But it's not only in those specific hubs. The effort to evacuate people from specific areas we conduct our operations is key to the success and the ability to mobilize. So we devised a very, very elaborate plan of action to evacuate, as I said, with text messages, with dropping leaflets, with making specific phone calls, with speaking with leaders of communities, but also speaking to international organizations in order for people to evacuate. The ability to, it wasn't only in order to evacuate, we also had a follow-up process to assess the amount of people that have evacuated. And as the operation expanded, we also fine-tuned it to limited evacuation from specific neighborhoods or for a specific area within a neighborhood, in order to focus and conduct a more focused evacuation specifically where the operations were expanding to. So that is one component, evacuation to get people out of harm's way, which sometimes gets overlooked or looked at very cynically. The second component was an establishment of a humanitarian zone in the southwest Gaza area, in an area called El Mawasi. It's an area which is mostly uninhabited. It's an area which has been mostly left alone by Hamas as a terrorist organization, but it's also an area that since the war began, Hamas has, from time to time, launched rockets from there, putting the people that have taken refuge in that area at risk. We have coordinated the access of increased amounts, over 140,000 tons of humanitarian supplies, mostly food supplies, but medical supplies as well. In the access of ambulances, the access of medical services, in order to facilitate the human strife that is indeed exists in the Gaza Strip due to the war. We've limited and conducted localized tactical pauses where we announce that we will not operate there, so that people can restock, resupply, or evacuate to other places. And we've maintained ongoing evacuation routes in order to enable people to mobilize out extensively from areas that are under potential threat. The humanitarian effort, and I think this is very important to mention, goes hand in hand with our operational effort. The people of Gaza are not our enemy. Hamas is the enemy. Hamas needs to be removed from power because we've seen what they do with power. They build this huge military capability, a military industry with rockets, with explosive devices. They built their Nukhba force, which is the special forces that penetrated Israel's border on the 7th of October. And therefore, we need to try and differentiate, distinguish them from the general population. We need to enforce precautions in order to limit the civilian strife and act proportionately against the enemy in order to get them out of harm's way, but take out the targets in order to give us the operational advantage on the ground. I think what's important, where we're going now and the last stages today, this morning, in January, moving forward, we've not completed our mission yet. We've dismantled most of Hamas's terrorist capabilities in the north of the Gaza Strip. Our efforts are continuing in the Khan Yunis area, where we understand and believe that most of Hamas's leadership have taken refuge, but they could shift into other places as well, such as Rafah, Deir el-Balach, and other places in central Gaza. We have continued to dismantle much of their industry of terrorism, the rocket manufacturing capabilities, the explosive drone capabilities. We've continued to do that. And I think that what's important is that the operation now is going to a different stage, which it will be conducted with different levels of intensity based on operational needs as they develop. It will not be at the same tempo as it has been in the last 3 months, precisely because we've dismantled so much of their terrorist infrastructure. It doesn't mean that there will not be more attacks from the northern areas, but as an institutionalized capability, it has been dismantled in the north and will continue to dismantle it in other places. I want to take advantage of my last 7 minutes to talk a bit about the front with Lebanon and Hezbollah specifically. In 2012, Hassan Nasrallah announced very publicly that if war begins with Israel, he will order Hezbollah soldiers to conquer the Galil, northern Israel. What their very, very specific plan of action that they published back then is very similar, and I would say probably one-to-one the type of plan of action that Hamas actually implemented on the 7th of October. What happened in the last 3 months on the border with Lebanon, where anti-tank guided missiles have been fired, attempts of infiltration took place even the day before yesterday here in Israel on the border with Lebanon. Sniper fire, rocket fire, anti-tank guided missile fired at a civilian house that killed 2 people at the end of last week. Explosive drones attacking military positions, civilian houses, and of course, machine gun fire, light gun fire across the border. If this would have happened just in a vacuum without a war taking place in the south against Hamas, this in itself, the nature of the attacks, the extent of those attacks, would have been in itself reason for war against Hezbollah. But we understand it as much of the much broader context of Hezbollah's efforts under the instruction of Iran to try and divert our attention away from the south. They're doing it, as I said, at the beck and call of Iran, together with the Houthis, with the Yemen rebel militia that have also conducted cruise missile strikes against Israel. The reality we are facing currently today in Lebanon is one where we have evacuated some 100,000 people from the border area to get them out of harm's way, as Hezbollah continues to attack us almost every day. And it's been escalating every single day. We are still in a position, I would say, of a defensive posture. I think the efforts are mostly focused now on defending Israel's territory and the integrity of our territory on one hand, preempting strikes that are being planned, whether that's against squads that are launching anti-tank guided missiles, RPGs, heavy munition rockets, taking out commanders that have a distinct influence in the planning process of those attacks. But the main effort from Israel's perspective remains a diplomatic effort to try and remove Hezbollah from the south of Israel and try and implement the outcome of the 2006 war, the UN Security Council Resolution 1701, that was supposed to ensure that Hezbollah does not exist in southern Lebanon and create and that they do not have arms threatening Israel. Unfortunately, the dynamics of escalation could prove that we will be at war with Hezbollah. I would say it's not our preferred choice. We would prefer that the diplomacy solves the issue, but from the military's perspective, we need to be prepared for that eventuality. We faced sporadic fire also from Syria. We've seen an increased effort by Hamas to aggravate the situation also from Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And indeed, we had yesterday a terrible attack from two terrorists that came in illegally into Israel and in Ra'anana, in a suburb of Tel Aviv. They came in from Hebron. So we are also on the alert in the West Bank as well. So that very, very broad but bleak overview, I think, describes where Israel is. The only certain thing that we face is a distinct level of uncertainty. And that is why the military is saying that 2024 is going to be a year of war and conflict. That is why the IDF identifies, especially the front with Hamas, a long war, because a terrorist entity that has, over the last 16 years, been preparing for this day, has created a reality where to dismantle it will be no quick fix. And with that, I want to hand it over and continue perhaps with questions and answers. I think I was right on time, Paul.
Thank you, Peter. Much appreciated, and amazing to see the quality and consistency, and the service that you're doing is incredible. So we have a whole range of questions, and we're actually going to have a special guest who's visiting here from Australia give a vote of thanks at the end, which it's actually Michael Kroger, for those of you that know Michael. So I'll introduce him a bit later on. So first question, Peter, is what's your view of the mindset where Israel believe that even though Hamas's genocidal intentions are known, there was this feeling that Hamas doesn't want conflict pre-October 7 and is focused on the quality of life in Gaza, which is commonly known in Hebrew as conceptia. And people forget that we had 20,000 plus workers coming in every day. Can you comment on that, please?
Sure. So I would, first of all, obviously, there's a strategic, fundamental failure of the defense establishment prior to 7th of October. Our chief of staff has spoken about that failure, taken personal responsibility. The head of the Shin Bet, the Israel Security Authority, has taken likewise responsibility for his failure. Of course, the military intelligence. There is the understanding that Hamas, I'll try and rephrase it like this. Over the course of the 16 years, 17 years that Hamas has controlled Gaza, the understanding was that Hamas wants to control Gaza. If they threaten Israel, they're jeopardizing that will, that ability. Over the course of those years, there are different types of actions that proved time and time again that Hamas is perhaps building these capabilities. But the fact that you have these capabilities doesn't necessarily indicate that there is a will to utilize them. And while the strategic, the fundamental level of that conceptia, the concept of operations, the understanding of Hamas's intentions, or the understanding was missed and misled or misread, it is clear that Israel needs to review and investigate the reasoning of that misconception. And the misconception is based not only on the level of the military, but also on the government level. And I think that this will be definitely one of the core components of Israel's, I would say, national security review after this war is over. The failures of the 7th of October are not only on the strategic level, they're also on the operational level of identifying the attack as it was being, so from intelligence, identifying the mobilization, and tactical and operational in the actual day itself of the forces weren't sufficient to deter the attack. The forces weren't sufficient in order to repel the massive invasion. What type of forces were required? How did we respond? What was the time frame of the IDF's response? Heartbreaking time for any Israeli. You know, I was out of the army for 7 years. When I hung up my uniform in 2017, I never thought I would be serving for 100 days, 100 consecutive days in reserve duty. Desperate times, desperate means, and today, despite the huge failure that all Israelis feel of the IDF, I have a huge sense of pride in what we are doing to restore safety and security for the people of Israel. Of course, the aftermath of this war, whenever it is finished, and the immediate lessons that need to be learned in order to identify potential threats developing and originating from Lebanon, for instance, those need to be learned immediately so that we don't fall into this trap again.
Thanks, Peter, for what I can only describe as a very frank and honest answer. But thank you so much. Question here is, are you confident the army can prevent hostages from being taken through the Rafah crossing into Egypt or other countries?
Of course, the hostages are a top national priority. And from the IDF's perspective, we have two goals to try and create the opportunity to bring to their release. One of those is militarily, so identifying intelligence from an intelligence perspective and creating the operational opportunity. Those need to be in line with the ability to succeed in releasing hostages. We have brought home one hostage to date in a rescue mission with a soldier that was abducted, Ori Megidish. But that's a huge challenge. Of course, the second component of that is bringing them home via diplomacy. Of course, there is a concern that they could be abducted and try and smuggle them into different other arenas. This is one of the challenges, and that is what we're trying to prevent as well.
Thanks, Peter. Can you comment, please, on Human Rights Watch's claim and other such organizations that the Israeli government is using starvation as a weapon in the Gaza Strip?
So I did outline the extent of our humanitarian effort. When the war began, obviously all of the crossings were closed for about 3 weeks, but there were reserves within the Gaza Strip. There was produce that was supposed to be exported from the Gaza Strip. So there is no real lack of food. So that is a false claim. And of course, since week 3, we resumed our operational activities, first through Nitzana to enable the processing and access of food supplies and medical supplies. And as I said, over 140,000 tons of supplies have gone in. I don't envy anybody in Gaza today. I'm not saying that there is no strife or no challenges. But we need to be very, very cautious of these organizations that are very quick to jump to conclusions and raise red flags as if this is the reality. It is a reality of a war Israel didn't ask for, a war Israel was surprised for, but a war nevertheless. And a war, I would say, that we have to win. The reality that they come into our bedrooms and butcher our babies, or as my wife said in our Tel Aviv suburb, they're coming for me as well, is an unbearable, unfathomable reality that no Israeli can accept ever again. The relationship between Israel and Gaza has to change. There needs to be a paradigm change. The paradigm change will relate to what type of commercial relationship happens between Israel and the Gaza Strip. But no, I can't say that there is definitely no policy of starvation. I would say that is unfounded, unbased, and also a blatant lie, because our efforts prove that there is ongoing humanitarian and medical supplies and food supplies that continue to go in. Is it sufficient? I would say we've improved from 20 trucks to a day at the very beginning of the war, which was, as I said, again, a surprise. It wasn't something we were planning for. To now over 230 truckloads per day. And of course, the efforts the international humanitarian organizations are conducting to alleviate that pressure is coordinated with us, and it's something that needs to continue.
Yeah, I don't know what country in the world would be attacked like we were and then facilitate humanitarian aid. So, and I actually heard, we met someone yesterday who was recently in Jabalia, and apparently the markets were open and full of fresh fruit and vegetables. Question here is, how does this end, and what does it look like in a year's time?
Well, ideally, I would say the Palestinians in Gaza need to determine their own destiny. It needs to be a destiny without terrorism. I think there's a lot of debates now in the Israeli political scene of what that day after looks like. Does it include the Palestinian Authority? Are the Palestinian Authority any better? These are political debates that are taking place. From the military perspective, the security situation needs to be improved. There needs to be no threat of terrorism, of using the Gaza Strip as a staging ground to attack Israel. We need to deplete and diminish Hamas's the capability to launch rockets against us. This is the challenge that we face. And as I said, it's going to take a long time. This I think is probably the challenge that we face with international legitimacy. When you say a long time, Peter, what does that actually mean? We've heard the defense minister last week spoke about we're not interested in resettling Israelis in Gaza, which I think should be amplified here on this platform. From our perspective, security needs to dictate the outcome. Palestinians in Gaza would ideally need to determine their own destiny for the Gaza Strip. When Israel left the Gaza Strip, the discussions where it can become the Singapore of the Middle East. Hamas decided instead of building skyscrapers to build this tunnel, as I described, this extensive tunnel system, which I think was at the detriment of the people of Gaza, not for their benefit. And this is what we need to aspire for as a society, as a community, as people, and as neighbors.
And a lot of people call them the dungeon tunnels. What's the IDF's view of South Africa's case against Israel and the IACC?
Well, I can imagine you followed it. Most of the information, of course, that our defense produced on Friday was based on a lot of IDF information. So, of course, the ICJ's case is unfound. There is no intent or practical actions to commit any sort of genocide against the people of Gaza. On the contrary, everything I pointed out to during this briefing was to get people out of harm's way. But it doesn't mean that the situation on the ground will not result in unfortunate deaths of civilians caught up in war. Any historian will identify that one of the biggest tragedy of warfare throughout the course of history has always been the civilian population that always pay a heavy price. It's tragic, it's unfortunate, and we need to do everything we can in order to take the precautions in order to limit those civilian deaths. And I would say we've gone to measures that no Western military go to. We have those measures are extensive, they are strategic, and they're part of our operational plan. So everything we've done actually points to the distinct opposite from genocide. If there's anybody that tried to conduct genocide against in this war, it was Hamas on the 7th of October that would have been happy to come all the way up to my wife in Ramat Gan and kill us all.
Thanks, Peter. How important is it that Israel deals personally with Sinwar? And does his holding of hostages make that almost impossible?
Sinwar is the, as I said, mastermind of this. He is the arch terrorist. He needs to go. I think everybody in the military command and on our political level and the political leadership has also designated him as a dead man walking. The operational terms to get rid of him will eventually be realized, and I'm confident that anybody that has any part of the cooks that were involved in the 7th of October broth will pay dearly. As rightly they should. Justice must be served.
And as our cousins say, inshallah. What update can you provide about the water being pumped into the tunnels?
So we don't discuss specifics, but I can say in the last 10 years, the IDF has developed vast technologies, techniques, and tactics to confront and deal with the terror threat. If there are different capabilities, and each different level of tunnel and different type of tunnel, because there are defensive tunnels, there are offensive tunnels, there are tunnels that are strategic in their essence, and there are tunnels where hostages are being held. Every hostage that has come out of Gaza in the operational pause in December, up until December, reported that they had been held in tunnels. So we need to proceed, I would say, both cautiously, intelligence-based, in order to destroy the tunnels on one hand, but bring back the hostages on the other hand. So I won't delve into specifics of those techniques, understandably, but of course there is I would say, broad arsenal of tools and capabilities that we have at hand.
You mentioned the Houthis very briefly in Yemen. Will Israel respond? And if not, why? And what can it do?
So the Houthis in their actions have become a global menace by attacking naval routes. They're undermining safety, security, and stability for everyone. That is why the US is leading a global coalition against the Houthis at sea, and have also developed a more limited coalition to conduct strikes, taking out some of those capabilities. So Israel, with regard to the Houthis' activities, is still currently on a defensive posture. Anything they fired towards us has been intercepted, mostly outside of Israel's airspace, in some cases by IDF aerial array defensive capabilities, or aircraft that have intercepted their cruise missiles. I think that is the policy of Israel currently. There's enough firepower in the Red Sea at the moment to engage and deter the Houthis.
And how do you see Israel keeping the communities down south and up north safe in the future once this conflict is hopefully behind us?
So there are two distinct, different arenas. Of course, we're at war with Hamas. That war can only end with the safe return of the people into the communities. The war should realize that reality for the people that live down south or want to move down south. I can tell you there's a whole movement of people that are saying we're moving down south when this is over, to make a statement, to rebuild the communities, to become part of those communities. So I think that is one thing that needs to be done, and I would expect that the government has announced that by the end of February we expect many of the communities down south to return home because of the outcome of the war effort. In the north, I think it's a bigger problem today. It's a bigger problem because Hezbollah is still in the south. They still have a huge amount of weapons. They have the capabilities to attack us. And that, from our perspective, poses a big challenge. And the people in the north are very, very concerned. They're saying, I have friends that have been evacuated from their houses, saying, I won't go home until I feel safe. That needs to be realized. As I said during my briefing, the efforts currently are diplomatic. The world is trying to alleviate that, but if not, we could find ourselves in another war on the border with Lebanon in order to create that security and safety for the people to return home.
Sure. Last question, which I'm not sure if the IDF can answer, but does Israel need volunteers, and what can the diaspora Jews do to help? Do more to help?
That's a very good, very, very good question. There are volunteer programs for people that want to join the military. So you can check up on our website, on the IDF website, if you want to get some more information about that. The question was, do we need? I think it's more of, do you need to come and volunteer? Which is, I think, the strong sense of family. My family in the UK, when they were waking up on the 7th of October, they were devastated, and this is something it reverberates around the Jewish world, how it is affecting all of us. And so when you ask, what can you do? I think the biggest ask I can give is, you need to empower your elected officials to be on the right side of history. The images coming out of Gaza are devastating because war is devastating, but there can be no mistake. Israel didn't have a choice, and Israel cannot go back to a reality where babies are fair game. There is no fair game in babies being abducted. There is no fair game in women, young women, being abducted into Gaza and being raped. This is an unacceptable reality that nobody would allow, nobody would permit. We will refuse to do so, and therefore, my biggest ask is reach out to your elected officials, convince them, rally them, argue with them when they are wrong, and celebrate them when they are right. And I think this, in my perspective, is the most important thing our supporters, Jewish or not, can do in these days.
Thanks, Peter. I think it's a great segue into Michael Kroger, who's a very close friend of the Chamber here and in Australia for many, many years. A very close friend of the Jewish community in Australia, very close friend of Israel, and actually happens to be here now doing some amazing work with live broadcasts every day for Sky News. And we're very fortunate to have Michael here to give us a vote of thanks. So Michael, over to you.
Perhaps just before he goes to Michael, there is other opportunities to volunteer in Israel, in farms and fruit picking and all the different types of things. Society is coming together, Israeli society. So if there's people that want to do that, that is also an option here to do that. Sorry for jumping in again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Over to you, Michael.
Well, Paul, thank you very much indeed. And before I thank Peter, can I just say what a wonderful trip you've organised for me here at very, very, very short notice. And I'm blown away by the work you do, the success of the Chamber, the contacts you've got. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for helping me make my small contribution to public debate back in Australia, and also to Bar and Benny, two of your lieutenants who have been on the journey with me. So, mate, thank you very much indeed.
Not quite lieutenant colonels, but there you go. But thank you. Yeah.
Well, Bar is a former sergeant in the IDF, so 10 years retired, so they've made their contribution. So, mate, thank you very much indeed. Peter, having watched you, and there's many people on this broadcast from Australia, we've all watched you 100, 200 times, over the years, broadcast, and, from all of us, thank you for your integrity, your honesty, your stoicism, for holding the line. This is not about Israel alone, as we know. This is a civilizational war between security, those that want security, sovereignty, liberty, and democracy. That's one part of the binary choice. On the other hand, you've got tyranny, anarchy, and butchery and savagery. And they are the choices. And Israel unfortunately is at the forefront of that civilizational war. But as you say, and as we know, there can be no other option than the success of Israel in this battle, because as we know, and as has been said over the years, if the bell tolls for Israel, it'll toll for the whole of mankind. Thank you for everything you do and you've done over the years. We've seen your face, we've admired everything you've said and done, and stay strong, my friend, because there, as you say, there can be only one outcome, and we hope and dream that we know what that is. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone. We're actually starting on time and finishing on time. So thanks, everyone. Stay safe, and we'll be in touch. All the best. Shalom.
Shalom.